Robert adjusted his collar for the third time as he waited at the Italian restaurant. At 62, he'd thought his days of first date jitters were long behind him. His daughter Emma had set this up, insisting that 5 years of widowhood was enough solitude for any man. The woman who walked through the door took his breath away. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with auburn hair that caught the soft restaurant lighting and warm brown eyes that seemed to hold entire stories. She wore a simple cream blouse and moved with a quiet confidence that comes only with age and experience. Robert stood as she approached, extending his hand. "You must be Margaret. I'm Robert. It's very nice to meet you." She took his hand, and her grip was firm, steady. But something flickered across her face, a shadow of recognition mixed with something he couldn't quite name. Sadness, maybe, or memory. "Hello, Robert," she said softly, and released his hand. They settled into their seats, and Robert found himself doing what he always did on first dates, filling the silence with stories about his work as a high school history teacher, his 2 grown children, his love of hiking on weekends. Margaret listened with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. When the waiter brought their wine, Margaret finally spoke. "You're still teaching at Lincoln High, then?" Robert paused, his glass halfway to his lips. "Yes, have been for 38 years now." "How'd you know?" "Your daughter mentioned it when she set this up," Margaret said, but her eyes told a different story. They talked through appetizers and into the main course. Margaret shared that she was a nurse, recently retired after 4 decades at County General. She'd lost her husband to cancer 7 years ago. Her son lived in Seattle with his family. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, but Robert couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unspoken hanging between them. It was when dessert arrived, tiramisu they'd agreed to share, that Margaret set down her fork and looked at him with those searching eyes. "Robert," she said quietly, "you don't remember me, do you?" The words hit him like a physical force. He studied her face more carefully now, looking past the lines that time had drawn, the silver threaded through her hair, searching for something familiar in the landscape of her features. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "Should I?" Margaret smiled, but it was tinged with old pain. "It was a long time ago, 41 years to be exact. You were 21, I was 17. It was the summer of 1984. Robert's mind raced backward through the decades. 1984. He'd been in college, home for the summer, working at his father's hardware store to earn money for his senior year. "The hardware store," Margaret said, watching the recognition begin to dawn in his eyes. "I came in every Tuesday with my father. He was building a deck that summer, and I'd help him pick out supplies." The memory surfaced slowly, like something rising from deep water. A girl with auburn hair and nervous smile. She'd been so young, so shy. He'd made small talk with her, teased her gently about always choosing the wrong size nails, shown her how to read the measurements on the boxes. "Maggie," he whispered. "Little Maggie Collins." "Not so little anymore," she said with a sad smile. Robert felt his throat tighten. "You had a crush on me." "I did," Margaret admitted without embarrassment. "A terribly obvious one, I'm sure. You were kind to me, though. Patient. You never made me feel silly for it." "I remember," Robert said, and he did now, the memories flooding back. "You brought me lemonade one afternoon, homemade, in a mason jar. 3 times that summer," Margaret corrected gently. "You probably don't remember the last time I came to the store. It was mid-August. You were leaving for school the next week." Robert shook his head slowly. "I'd worked up all my courage," Margaret continued, her voice steady but soft. "I was going to ask if I could write to you, if maybe when I was older, finished with school, we could go out properly. I had this whole speech planned." "What happened?" Robert asked, though something in his chest already knew the answer would hurt. "Your girlfriend came into the store, tall, blonde, beautiful, college girl like you. She kissed you right there, by the paint counter, and you introduced her as Sarah, the girl you were going to marry." Robert closed his eyes. Sarah, his first wife, mother of his children, gone now these 5 years from a heart that had simply stopped one ordinary Tuesday morning. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Don't be," Margaret said firmly. "You had nothing to apologize for. You were always kind to me, Robert. You treated me like a person, not like the awkward teenager I was. Do you know how rare that is? How much that mattered?" "Still," Robert said, I never knew. Of course you didn't, Margaret interrupted gently. And that's okay. I went home that day and cried for a week. Then I went to nursing school like I'd planned. Met my husband Tom 2 years later at a hospital fundraiser. Had a beautiful life with him, a wonderful son, a career I loved. No regrets. Then why? Robert gestured between them, at the dinner, the date. Why agree to this if you knew it was me? Margaret's smile was genuine now, warm. Because when your daughter called me and told me about her father, the widowed history teacher who loved hiking and old movies and terrible jokes, who was kind and patient and had spent 38 years teaching young people to care about the past, I thought, that sounds exactly like the young man who was kind to me when I was 17. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I wanted to see if I was right, she said. If the boy who treated an awkward girl with respect and gentleness had grown into the kind of man I suspected he would. And? Robert asked, his voice rough with emotion. You're even better than I imagined, Margaret said simply. You asked about my work before asking what I looked like. You listened when I talked about my patients, remembered details, asked follow-up questions. You held the door for the elderly couple leaving as we came in. You thanked the waiter by name. You're still him, Robert. Still kind. Robert felt tears prick his eyes. I lost Sarah 5 years ago. Thought maybe I was done with all this. Love, companionship, all of it. I know, Margaret said. Your daughter told me. She also told me that you've spent 5 years taking care of everyone else, making sure your kids are okay, being there for your students, but forgetting to take care of yourself. Sounds like something Emma would say, Robert admitted. She loves you very much, Margaret said, and she wants you to be happy. Not to replace her mother, but to let yourself live again. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still touching across the table. Can I ask you something? Robert said finally. Anything. If you could go back knowing what you know now, would you still want me to remember you? Would you want 17-year-old Maggie to have her happy ending with 21-year-old me? Margaret considered this carefully. No, she said finally, because then I wouldn't have had Tom or my son or the life I built. And you wouldn't have had Sarah or Emma or your other daughter. We weren't meant to have that story, Robert, but maybe, if we're both very lucky, we're meant to have this one. Robert turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I'd like that. I'd like to get to know you, Margaret. Not the memory of Maggie, but who you are now. And I'd like to know you, she said. The real you, not the boy I built up in my 17-year-old imagination. They talked until the restaurant began closing, until the waiter had refilled their coffee cups 3 times and finally gave them a gentle hint that perhaps they might continue their conversation elsewhere. Walking Margaret to her car, Robert said, Thank you for telling me, for being honest about our history. Thank you for being exactly who I hoped you'd be, Margaret replied. Can I see you again? Robert asked. Maybe next week? There's a new exhibit at the museum, photographs from the 1980s. Might be fun to see what we were all wearing back then. Margaret laughed, a sound like bells. I'd love that. Though I warn you, my fashion choices in 1984 were questionable at best. Can't be worse than my mullet, Robert said, and they both laughed. As he drove home that night, Robert thought about the strange paths life takes. How the girl he'd barely noticed 41 years ago had grown into the woman who might just help him find his way back to living. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about dramatic first meetings or love at first sight. Sometimes they're about second chances, about people who grew separately into exactly who they needed to be before they could find each other again. And sometimes kindness, offered freely with no expectation of return, plants seeds that bloom decades later into something beautiful. If this story warmed your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected second chances and the enduring power of kindness. Leave a comment sharing your own story of reconnection or a moment when someone's simple kindness changed your life. Your words might be exactly what someone needs to read today.